Hello, my name is Dr. Reed Tuckson, co-founder of the Black Coalition Against COVID and the Black Coalition for Health, welcoming you to RSV prevention from womb to adulthood. Respiratory syncytial virus is an illness that impacts the young and the old alike. Tonight, our panel of experts will discuss everything that you need to know about this important disease and the latest developments in RSV vaccinations. I want to remind you that this conversation occurs in the context of our challenge in addressing three significant viral illnesses that are occurring concurrently in our population. That's COVID, influenza, and RSV. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight, RSV, but it is important in its own right, but it's also important to know that it is important in the context of the other challenges that we are facing. This program is sponsored by BIO, the world's largest biotech trade association, the field where breakthroughs begin. And of course, it is sponsored by our friends at BlackDoctor.org. Well, let me introduce our panelists today. First, Dr. Eric Griggs, who is the Assistant Vice President of Community Affairs at Access Health, Louisiana. Dr. Griggs was the national chair of the COVID-19 task force for the 100 Black Men of America. Additionally, he serves as an adjunct assistant professor at the Tulane School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine and at the LSU School of Medicine and also at the Xavier University College of Pharmacy. Indeed, a very busy health professional. We're also joined by Dr. Angela C.B. Walker, a practicing obstetrician and gynecologist for 25 years, the medical director of a major health insurance company, and a dedicated warrior committed to helping people achieve their optimal health and wellness goals. She's done this through her book, in part, The Game Plan, A Woman's Guide to Becoming a Doctor and Living a Life in Medicine. This is a very instructive book. And by the way, for those parents that are watching this show and have young children, especially young girls who are interested in a career in health, you might want to bring them to the screen so that they can see a good example of what they may want to become. We're also joined by Dr. Oliver Brooks, a good friend to this program, a good friend to Black Health. He is a pediatrician and the chief medical officer of the Watts Healthcare Corporation in South Central Los Angeles. Additionally, he is a board member and past president of the California Immunization Coalition and chairman of the Immunize LA Families Coalition. I was pleased to see him as an advisor on COVID vaccine safety to the federal government oversight committees, and we've always known him as a past president of the National Medical Association. As our conversation unfolds, we may be joined by our colleague Adoja Kiri-Mayton, Vice President of Public Affairs and Communications at the National Minority Quality Forum, and we hope that she will be able to participate in this discussion as it unfolds. But to get us started, let's turn to you, Dr. Brooks, and help us to understand what is RSV, what is it, and what does it do to the body?
All right, well, hello, and thank you for allowing me to be on this panel with these distinguished guests. RSV stands for respiratory syncytial virus. Let's just stick with RSV. It is a respiratory virus, which means it affects the respiratory tract. The respiratory tract starts at the nose and ends at the bottom of the lungs. So what it does, it causes symptoms, generally it's symptoms of a cold, which is a respiratory virus, rhinovirus. Cough, runny nose, can cause fever, fatigue, and just feeling ill. Let's call that the upper. Then it gets down into the lungs. It can cause difficulty with breathing, a lot of excess phlegm in the chest. And with all that, you can therefore get a reduction in your oxygen level, and it can cause a pneumonia. So it is a significant cause of infection, especially for those that are more susceptible to it.
Now, that sounds an awful lot like some symptoms of other diseases that we are becoming all too familiar with. Can you tell us the difference between RSV, influenza, and COVID?
So honestly, they're caused by three different viruses, but practically speaking, they are very similar. They all affect the respiratory tract. They all tend to do their damage in the lungs as opposed to in the nasal passages. Influenza clinically hits more rapidly. 9 a.m., you got a little cold. At 3 p.m., you feel like you've been hit by a truck. RSV and COVID can come on more slowly. It is imperative, therefore, to know the difference because, as a doctor, because the approach to the conditions are different. But in the end, they are all respiratory viruses that can cause significant illness and even death in someone who gets it.
So, as a physician, when someone comes to the Watts Health Center there with symptoms that could be either of those, do you do anything special to differentiate whether it's COVID or whether it's flu or whether it's RSV?
Right. So the simple thing is the answer is yes. And what you do is you test for it. So there are tests that can clearly define whether you have one of the three. And note, you could have two of the three. Theoretically, you could have three of the three. Mathematically, rather unlikely. But yes, you test for it. And it's a rapid test and it gives you information, generally 15 minutes or so, and allows me and other doctors to direct our therapies.
Well, one of the things that a lot of us in public health are particularly concerned about right now is that people will come to the healthcare system, to the emergency rooms with one or other of those. But it certainly means, I think, that there could be an awful lot of pressure on the health system because you've got three diseases going on at the same time. Are you concerned, Dr. Brooks, that we may find ourselves overrunning the health system if we don't get these things under control?
I have a minor concern. I think that with our experience with COVID, we've learned to cope with getting overrun with patients with particular illnesses. Obviously, COVID respiratory. We do not know yet what this season will be. The respiratory virus season tends to be October through March. We're just into October, and we will scale up. I have a concern that it could happen, but I have confidence that we'll be able to manage it.
Well, thank you. I see we do have our colleague Adoja. Adoja, am I saying your name properly?
It's Adjua.
Adjua. Say it again.
Adjua.
It's just such a beautiful name. My gosh,
Thank you
you
for
were
that.
born lucky, I think. Adjua, would you? I know that you at the National Medical NMQF that you have been really studying data on the impact that this disease can have on Black Americans. So, is this a serious problem for us?
This is a significant problem for us. And if I may, I like to show a few statistics as to why.
Please do. And we're going to see if our producers can make that happen.
Oh, okay. Well,
Hold on one
if
sec.
not, I could at least just rattle a few statistics. The fact of the matter is that RSV has a high burden on infants in particular. And no more really with Black infants. Unfortunately, African American women are 50% more likely to give birth to a premature child. And premature babies can be particularly impacted by RSV because, unfortunately, they have it 3 times more likely to die if they contract RSV at that very young and precious age. So we have to be extremely diligent to protect our young. Um, Even if we're not concerned about the mortality rate, we must be concerned about the long term impacts of RSV on our children all the way to adulthood. We are much more likely to have underlying conditions like asthma and other respiratory diseases that exacerbate the symptoms of RSV. And not just the clinical burden, we also are more likely to be impacted by the financial burden of RSV. We are less prepared for hospitalizations um, that can occur when you have severe RSV. And we are also more likely to have hospitalizations. And if particularly a large portion of our population rely on public insurance, whether it's Medicaid or others. And so we have to sometimes deal with inadequate coverage when it comes to RSV hospitalizations. I believe you mentioned earlier that, there's going to be the issue of hospitals being overwhelmed. RSV, because it has so many similar symptoms to other diseases, can often go underreported in our communities. So there really isn't proper surveillance of RSV in our communities. And so we as a community need to come together and be very diligent about being aware of what the symptoms are, understanding what the treatment options are, and advocating for ourselves.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to come back to you in a bit to understand the things that you and the National Minority Quality Forum have been advocating to try to get control over that and how we can approach it as a community. But before we do that, let me come back to Dr. Brooks for just a moment and try to get his perspective on that. So, Dr. Brooks, we're seeing and hearing that from the epidemiological or the statistical data that this disease affects both children and adults. What are you seeing in your practice?
Exactly that. The number of deaths per year from RSV are about 6,000 to 10,000 in older adults. That's 60 and up. 5,000 to 7,500 in children. What I've seen in the past, let's talk about, because it really hasn't hit hard right now, is children coming in with ultimately cold symptoms, but the worst children come in with difficulty breathing. They cough very hard, and what you see is a wheeze. And when I check their oxygen levels, it's low. RSV is frustrating because there's really not a lot of treatment for it. What you do is give them fluids and oxygen and hope and wait. There's no true medication to treat RSV. So right now, I'm not seeing a lot of it. But again, as I said, we're early in the viral respiratory season.
Let me take a moment and slow this down and focus on something you just said. And that was, even you're seeing kids that could come in with wheezing. I want, sometimes I think we in the public don't really think about what some of these symptoms mean. I'm just coming out of the worst case of COVID that I could ever imagine a person getting, other than those who had to be on ventilators and so forth. And my main problem was sore throat. For 2 days, I could not sleep because every time I swallowed, it was like swallowing gasoline or swallowing razor blades. Now, when sometimes we say, well, it will cause a sore throat, people think, well, I know what a sore throat is. No, some of these diseases, you don't know what a sore throat is.
Right.
A sore throat that makes every second of your life miserable. And I went through that for 2 solid days. And I am telling you, when this show is over, I will pass out. I am so tired. And so when we talk about a child wheezing, Dr. Brooks, what in the world? You have held little children, little Black children in your arms who have been wheezing. Tell us what that means.
And also know that I have cared for them in the hospital when they're intense and on IV fluids and oxygen. So what happens basically with wheezing, and a lot of people, I guess, don't really understand or know, wheezing is essentially sound going through a narrowed airway. So when you whistle, that's wheezing. Whistle, same root in the word. It's ultimately when you can get air into your lungs, but you have a hard time getting the air out. So, and just like you felt miserable with that sore throat, anytime your breathing is compromised, you feel bad. I mean,
you suffer. You suffer.
The children that are wheezing, they're anxious. What we see in the younger children, the ones that get hospitalized are generally young infants, less than 6 months of age. They don't feed well, they're irritable, they cry, but you can sense their illness. You can sense that they're not right, and it is a challenge to treat, and it's something that I am happy we haven't talked about it yet. That there's something more that we can do about it now.
Well, let's talk about that right now, because we have got to, in our community, prevent suffering. And we do not want one child to suffer unnecessarily, or one adult to suffer unnecessarily. So how can we prevent this disease? And I imagine that the answer must be, I hope that there is a vaccine that works.
So there is a vaccine that works, both for older adults, and right now the vaccine itself is for pregnant people. There's also another option, which is an injection that you can give to the mother. Excuse me, injection that you give to the baby, to the infant, to the newborn. So we have a safe and effective vaccine. As it relates to the children, you give it to the mother at 32 to 36 weeks of pregnancy. She makes antibodies, and the antibodies cross the placenta and go into the baby. So when the baby is born, the baby has circulating antibodies, and when that RSV comes along, the body is already ready for it, armed and prepared.
Wow. Dr. Walker, you are our in-house obstetrician gynecologist. What's your perspective on the vaccine and how the mechanism, how it works and why it's effective and important to get? And take yourself off mute and we'll be happy to hear you.
Trying not to interfere with anyone else's magic. Yeah, I think the concept of vaccines and pregnancy is nothing new. I think the audience should know, particularly mothers, is that the science is there, the studies have been done, and obviously it's FDA approved and supported by the American College of OBGYNs. But the way the vaccine works is just as was just discussed, is it's given to me as the mother, and I make the antibodies, and I can passively give that to the baby. To me, it's a gift that you can give to your child, particularly in that first 6 months of life, where you're passing on immunity to a virus that could wreak havoc, on your newborn and keep that baby potentially out of the doctor's office and out of the hospital. So essentially, you're giving passive immunity, so it crosses the placenta.
So when does that occur? When do you give this vaccine?
So I think it was just mentioned by Dr. Brooks. The studies or the current recommendation is between 32 and 36 weeks. It's actually 36 weeks and six days, so almost up to 37 weeks. That's optimal time. And at that point, you're making the antibodies that will cross the placenta and pass on to the baby.
Now, there may be some people who will say, my goodness, that seems, do I really want to kind of do that? Pregnancy is a complicated time, and I'm always being instructed what I can and cannot eat, and that it may affect the baby, and what drugs I can take. Tell me, help our audience to understand why this is not only not dangerous, but in fact safe.
Well, yes. I mean, it's vaccines, as we know, is not a new concept. I think, many people now have vaccine fatigue, unfortunately, because of, COVID. But we've been giving vaccines during pregnancy for decades. So we've given the flu vaccine, which is recommended in pregnancy, now COVID vaccine. And again, I think it was mentioned, you can have all three. And it is a vaccine that is safe to the mom, unless you have any, predisposition to vaccines, and that's in general. Safe to mother and also considered safe to the infant. It's in the third trimester, so your baby is at that point has all of its organs formed, and so you're not worried about anything happening in the first trimester of pregnancy. Although I'm sure those studies will come about as well, because there are vaccines that can be given at that early stage. But
let me come back to Dr. Brooks for just a minute on this issue of safety. One of the challenges that we have been facing, and COVID sure brought this up for us over and over again, as we all know, that there were a lot of people who wanted to foster misinformation about vaccine safety and wondered whether or not there had been adequate clinical trials. And a lot of people in the Black community also wondered, well, did we have people involved in the regulatory and review process? Dr. Brooks, you, thank goodness for your service to our community, have been intimately involved in the regulatory reviews of vaccines and on the special committees that are charged to make sure that these vaccines are safe. What can you tell us about the safety of this RSV vaccine?
So I actually sit on the advisory committee of immunization practices, which reviews the FDA's recommendations and then makes recommendations on how to use the vaccine. So one of 15 in the country. we review reams of data. We get information from the manufacturer, and then we have our own studies. So this has been well studied. COVID vaccine, for example, was one of the most highly studied vaccines ever. We do see African Americans involved in the clinical trials, not as many in this RSV vaccine as we would like, but we are there. And also in the COVID-19, we were proportionally represented. We're about 12% of the population. We're about 11% of the study participants. The other thing is we did, at least COVID, we met with the manufacturer and asked the questions in terms of is there any concern for infertility? Or there were other concerns that were spoken by the African American community. So the other thing I tell people, I don't get any gain from recommending a vaccine I truly believe is not safe. I'm only going to do what's right for my community. So there is reasonable and legitimate skepticism in the African American community regarding vaccines and any studies, if you will. That being stated, if you hold off on getting vaccinated, you are just putting yourself at risk. So we have now developed, it was very difficult to get an RSV vaccine. So we were able to break the code and get a vaccine. So now, unlike back with the US public health system, when they did not treat those men that had syphilis, this is a situation where there is a treatment that you're actively withholding if you don't get vaccinated. So understand that the vaccines are safe and effective and recommended by Black doctors, BlackDoctor.org also, I imagine, and the National Medical Association. So, I don't know what else to say, but we need to save ourselves.
And Dr. Griggs, you have been in this this kind of part of the struggle for quite a while. And Dr. Brooks alluded to the Tuskegee syphilis study, which we really want to call mainly the U.S. Preventive Health Services study on syphilis in untreated men. And in that study, what I think Dr. Brooks was getting at is that Black men were denied access to the drug that would have saved their lives. For those of us who are outraged by that study, and all of us should be, it makes zero sense to deny ourselves access to the vaccines that would save our lives as some kind of protest against Tuskegee. How do you view that issue, Dr. Griggs?
So, yeah, I absolutely agree, especially when it's predicated on the myth that those men were injected with syphilis. It just doesn't work that way. They were denied access. So confronting these myths and confronting these issues head on in order to protect ourselves is what's necessary. Putting the elephant in the middle of the room and eating it one bite at a time, as uncomfortable as it might seem, is the best approach.
Now, I wonder, though, and as we alluded at the top of the show, that we've got 3 different viruses going on, all of which have vaccines available in one way or another to try to mitigate the consequences of it. Are you worried about, as you do your work in Louisiana and as you are an advisor to 100 Black men around the country, are you worried about vaccine burnout now?
Yeah, I think we're past the point of people being burned out about talking about vaccines. And it's all fun and games until someone gets sick, and then they worry about what they can do to prevent it the next time. We've been talking about this for a while. The first part of the fight was getting people to understand. At the very beginning of the pandemic, I would run into people that would say that I'm not getting the vaccine, but I'll take my shot. And getting people to understand that it's the same word. So the literacy, the vaccine, the importance of prevention, those things tend to they can overtake the burnout.
And is it possible then, since I don't want to have to travel all over town 3 times to get a vaccine on 3 different occasions, can I get my 3 doses all at the same time?
So interestingly, there's no, as Dr. Brooks can tell you, kids and infants get multiple vaccines all the time. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend getting it in the same arm because of the side effects of a sore arm, but it's very safe to get them and when they're available.
All right. And I would, again, use me as a poster child of a warning. I was supposed to have gotten my COVID shot on Monday. I fell ill on Friday. And so the virus apparently did not check my calendar. And I'm very upset about that. And I'll tell you one again, if I could have turned the clock back, I would have gone in on Monday a week ago. And I don't care where I would have found me a dose, because I don't want anyone to go through what I have gone through the last few days. So this is your opportunity, folks, to make sure that this program gets you going. In that regard. And so as you, Dr. Walker, are talking to your patients, what's the hardest challenge that you're facing with trying to get your patient population to become vaccinated with RSV and also with COVID or flu?
I think in general, the challenge with our pregnant patients is their overall concern for their unborn child. So that goes back from the beginning of my practice in OBGYN. So it requires trust for your provider, and so a relationship that you build with your patients, and personal knowledge. So it requires I think patients that trust that their doctor is actually seeking out the information and knows what has transpired. So the studies, how many patients were in this study, and we have patients that will ask, well, where can I find the information? And so I think ultimately it is a matter of trust. And so I'm really happy that we have a forum for our mothers of color to see that there are doctors of color that really believe in the vaccines. And my personal experience with vaccines, and when this one in particular, is what I would tell patients all the time. If I was pregnant again, which you would have to pick me up off the floor, as my days are over, this would definitely be a vaccine that I would take to pass that immunity to my baby, to help them avoid one more injection that they would have to get when they're born.
Well, one of the words that's come up here has been clinical trials and being involved in that. Adjua, I wonder whether, I know that the National Minority Quality Forum has been a strong advocate of getting more people of color into clinical trials. Can you talk about why that's so important and what we need to do?
Yes. The more we participate in clinical trials, the more we can ensure that therapies that are being developed are developed and designed for us. We love that, for us, by us, right? But we have to participate. We have to have skin in the game in order for that to happen. That's just the way science works and development works. And so we shouldn't be afraid of that. It is part of our duty. It's the way we protect our communities, the way we protect our loved ones, by participating in clinical trials. And it is something that other communities are participating in fully, and we're denying ourselves optimal care when we self deselect ourselves from the process and remove ourselves from the ability of modern breakthrough medicines that are changing the world and changing the reality of a lot of these diseases that continue to impact us the most.
Wow, great. And Dr. Griggs, you as well, you have been a tireless advocate for participation in clinical trials. What are your thoughts on this? Take yourself off mute, and when you can.
Yeah, that would help, right? In order for us to be most protected, we have to do the things that pertain most to us. Again, confronting the myths of clinical trials, explaining the process, explaining how safe things are. There are things like institutional review boards now that ensure safety for our people, for people that participate. So I've been beating the ground, making cartoons, having the hard conversations, doing whatever I can to get people involved in clinical trials so we can protect ourselves.
Outstanding. Let me come back now to the vaccine process again. I want to just make sure that we're kind of clear. So, Dr. Brooks, you You told us that that we have a vaccine for RSV, which is given to the mother during pregnancy, the third trimester, and then what happens after that?
So, first, just real quickly, those institutional review boards where you're doing human subjects trials, which sounds really bad, but I mean, we're talking about vaccines and medications. That was as a direct result of what happened with African American Black men at the U.S. Public Health Service. I just want to make a note of that. So at least
that's an important point. Let's just underscore that. So this is a very important point, and we would want every member of the audience to be able to transmit this message in their social clubs and the churches and everywhere else. What I heard you say, Dr. Brooks, is as a result of the absolute outrage of the Tuskegee experience, that it caused a change in the way in which research is done in America. And I want you to say it one more time, because people need to get that although it was a terrible tragedy, something at least good came from it.
Right. So as a direct result of what the United States Public Health Service was doing to African American men in Alabama, out of that came institutional review boards where you have to have signed consent to be involved in any study. It could be what type of Band-Aid works better. I'm serious, because I've read IRBs. They're very, very tough. So that was one thing that was good that came out of the horror of what happened at Tuskegee.
Let me just on this point bring Dr. Griggs in as well. And so, Dr. Griggs, you as such a strong advocate for African Americans making informed decisions, talk a little bit about what it means to be a research subject and having to go through the consent process. What are my rights as a research subject in these institutional review boards?
So first of all, the institutional review boards are most of the time are comprised by people of the community as well as medical professionals. So there is a voice of the people in the community in the oversight of the clinical trials. Now, as a patient or participant in the trial, you have the absolute right to withdraw from the study at any time. You have the right to all of the information. You have the right to understand and ask questions and decide at any point, I don't want to be involved in this anymore. You have the absolute right to control your participation or not.
So, Dr. Griggs, again, also just to nail this one, are there any studies that are allowed in this country on human beings that are outside of the regulatory authority of these institutional review boards?
Absolutely not. Absolutely 1000% no. In French, no. In English, no. In Spanish, no. In whatever language you want, no. Absolutely not.
All right. So now that we understand that a little bit more, and by the way, folks, please feel free to look up institutional review boards. Institutional simply just means it's the place where the study is being done, and it's the review process that does that. Feel free to look that up, because we really want and need people of color to participate in clinical trials, and we want you to know that when you do so, it's regulated and you are safe, and no one is going to do something to you that is nefarious. But I think that we heard earlier that the idea is that if we want to know whether a drug works for us and is safe, we have to participate. You can't have it both ways. I think Dr. Walker had made that comment earlier. And so you have to know that if we don't participate, we can't then complain that we don't know whether the drug is safe for us. So now back to the story. Dr. Brooks, we're trying to go ahead, and I'm so glad we took that detour. That was an extremely important detour. So now let's go through the process again in terms of what we can do to try to prevent this RSV. And so we started out knowing that there is a vaccine that mothers can take in the third trimester. And what happens after that?
That's it. Get the vaccine, you're done. Now, there is another modality. I don't know if this is the form in which we've discussed it. There's actually an injection we can give to the baby if the mother didn't get vaccinated. But essentially, a pregnant person 32 to 36 weeks of gestation of the baby, goes in and sees Dr. Walker, and Dr. Walker's, yeah, you're getting close, and baby's big, and you're going to lose all that weight when you breastfeed. I'm sure she says that. She gives the shot, or her nurse gives the shot. That's it. It's just the baby is protected. The efficacy is somewhere around 80%, 82% in the first season, 56% in the second season. And that's from hospitalization or bad outcomes. A lot of times people will get like COVID. COVID vaccine was not developed to stop COVID. COVID vaccine was developed to stop you from getting sick from COVID, sick, I mean, hospitalized, ventilator, like you said, or death. So same with this. I mean, the baby can get RSV, but they're 80% less likely to be hospitalized. So that's the mother just has to say yes.
And what about for adults? Since we don't have that available, what would you say for trying to prevent this disease for Black adults, especially those who have other pre-existing conditions?
No, first of all, there is an RSV vaccine for those 60 and older. So it's shared clinical decision making. So you talk to your doctor and say, okay, doc, do you think I really need to get this vaccine? And the doctor should answer, in my opinion, yes, because 60 and older, you have deaths, okay, maybe 12,000 a year. And it tends to happen people with underlying conditions like everything, COVID, RSV, and then influenza is the other one. So yeah, 60 and older, there is a vaccine, the same vaccine that we're talking about. There are two of them actually, GSK and Pfizer, each make one, equally, utilizable. So yeah, those 60 and older, in my opinion, African Americans, especially with an underlying condition, diabetes, hypertension, kidney disease, COPD, any immune suppressant medications, cancer, get the RSV vaccine.
So I was trying to provoke you to get that out there, and I'm glad that you did. And so let's just, so Dr. Brooks, you're talking to me, and I'm a 64-year-old person with diabetes. Talk to me about what I should do about getting about this vaccine.
So I would let you know that it's a virus out there very similar to COVID and influenza that can be deadly. And you, with age and diabetes, are at higher risk, such that if you get infected, you may end up getting hospitalized or dying, are a great candidate for the vaccine. The vaccine is safe and effective. It's been studied in your age group and in your ethnicity. So there is minimal to no downside. There have been some cases of certain conditions from people that have been vaccinated, but the bottom line in medicine is risk reward, or benefit risk, another way to look at it. So for you, Dr. Tuckson, I have ordered RSV vaccine, and my nurse will give it to you after I leave the room. Have a good day.
Got it. And then Dr. Griggs, let me also just ask you, sometimes some of these Black men, even those in 100 Black men, can be a little obstinate. What kind of stuff are you faced with, brother?
So what am I not faced with? Again, I'm well seasoned now. I'd like to think at the beginning of the pandemic I had hair and I pulled it all out, but I think I didn't have it before then. It's dealing with the same issues because we've moved to a different phase of the COVID pandemic to it being endemic. People tend to confuse it and its nature with the other respiratory viruses of the season, and they're starting to think that it's a benign disease. Oh, it's a coronavirus. Oh, it's just like a little cold. No, it's the most deadly cold that you can possibly imagine. It's still COVID, and as we've said discussed in other forums, it's still something that affects the circulatory system in ways that other viruses don't. So it can be damaging and lead to long-term sequelae or long-term side effects and effects that we see in the form of long COVID. So the fight is still there. The jokes of the barbershops have started again. why I go to the barbershops. Obviously, I don't need haircuts. It's to educate and to inform and to be entertained and to, but it's where you find out what's going on in the community.
That's where you find out who the greatest point guard ever was of all time and have an argument that goes out into the streets. That's what I enjoy it for. Joja, one of the things that we know is that women are the health officers of the Black family, maybe making about 75% of all the health decisions for a family. What's the role of the family in getting this Black man with 65 years old with diabetes to get their RSV vaccination?
Oh, well, I think, we learned very young that maybe in some families the man may be the head, but the woman is the neck. And so when she provides some advice, listen to her, right? Women are most likely to review health information, to study it, to ask all the right questions. And so, just like you listen to your mother, listen to the women in your family. But I just want to also just appeal to the women here as, mother to mother, as we were been talking about vaccine hesitancy. Unfortunately, 2 in 3 women are not receiving the appropriate vaccinations during pregnancy. That is an awful, awful statistic. And I mean, that's from Tdap to COVID to RSV. So what is happening there? Part of it is our own hesitancy, and we say we care about and making sure that our children are born with optimal health opportunities. So the math is not mathing, is it? But the other issue is that sometimes we're not getting the referrals. Maybe there's the assumption that we don't have the insurance. So make sure you ask. Ask your doctor. It may not always be that you have one of these wonderful doctors on the panel today in your facility, but make sure to advocate for yourself. Ask about it. Use the knowledge that you learned today. Review the information. At NMQF, we have RSVEquityAction.org. It's a full report
I'm
about
sorry, say that again.
RSVEquityAction.org.
Say slower.
RSVEquityAction.org.
All right.
There we go. Thank you, Dr. Tuxton. And so that's an opportunity to review all the facts, all the research, information that we talked about today. Make your own conclusions, download things, and share it with your family. Talk to your doctor about it, and make sure that we start to close those gaps in the disparities in immunization.
Well, let me ask the doctor, by the way, Dr. Walker, what are your comments on those last comments? And make sure you unmute.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you've heard from everybody and definitely really great information about the safety of the vaccine, the benefits, the ease of getting the vaccine, and just the knowledge that this is a gift as a mother that you could give to your child. Anything that we can do to help to prevent untoward events to our babies, and knowing that you have, physicians of color that are advocating for you to do, what's good for your baby. But ultimately, I think, for practitioners, it's important to listen to your patient. What I've found is that when you have patients that are hesitant, beating them over the brow and shaming them does not work. Listening and addressing their concerns, and it may not be this visit, but next visit, is typically what helps those that are hesitant.
Even though it's implied or implicit in what you just said, let's turn that around a little bit. And let's just say that if you take off your MD for a minute and let you be patient Walker,
Yes.
what should you be prepared to do to have that conversation so that your doctor there'll be an honest and real talk? How do we make real talk?
I mean, I think ultimately what patients ask is that, okay, are there studies? Are there long-term studies? How do we know that this is going to be safe long-term wise? And what, I would tell patients is that we've had this, the idea of vaccines is not new. This virus itself is not new. The fact that we have a vaccine for it was just, due to come. And so the technology behind the vaccine is not anything new. And so vaccines and pregnancy is not something that's new, and we certainly wouldn't have gotten it through FDA approval and had all the colleges of medicine behind it when we're talking about babies. So I think you can rest assured that there is plenty of data and plenty of knowledge. Some things we may never know, but what we do know is that RSV affects babies in a disproportionate way, and definitely babies of color, African-American babies, much greater than others. So if we can help to protect that, then we've done something right.
Put your MD back on, and now I'm a patient, and I'm talking to you. I don't know how to say this to you, Dr. Walker. I heard this show that made me feel like I needed to come here and think about the RSV, but they were, I'm not really sure I know even what the word vaccine means. I'm scared you're going to think I'm stupid, aren't you? And I'm ashamed that I don't know some of these scientific terms. Oh, never mind. I got to go. I can't even ask you.
It's okay. I mean, a vaccine, to put it simple, it's the way that your body fights. If you get a cold, if you've had the flu, your body will fight it off. And that's how our bodies, we call it antibodies, but our body is basically fighting that off so that next time when you come against that virus, then your body helps to fight it off. So same thing, let's use the chickenpox. So somebody that got the chickenpox when they were young, they made antibodies to fight that off. So with the vaccine, we're just giving an injection, and it helps your body to make a response to the virus, but you don't actually get sick.
And so was my question stupid? Should I be afraid?
Absolutely
or
not.
shy to ask? Because you doctors, you've got these white coats on and you look so busy all the time.
Yeah, but if you work on cars, I'm going to ask you about your business. I don't know anything about cars, so everybody has their lane. But you should be number one, seeing a physician that you're comfortable asking questions to.
Yeah.
And you do have a choice. If you don't feel like you're being heard or you feel like you're being dismissed, then you may want to choose someone that you feel actually understands and listens to you.
Are there any dumb questions, Dr. Griggs?
No, there are absolutely no dumb questions. And I have to speak to your point. You asked about the word vaccine when you went to go see Dr. Walker. What is a vaccine? I want to give you the history. Vaca, the root word of vaccine is cow. And it actually goes back to cowpox, of which they attribute being the father of vaccines to Edward Jenner. But I want folks to know, particularly in this platform, that actually the father of the concept of vaccines in the United States was a slave named Onesimus that was owned in Boston, Massachusetts by Cotton Mather in the 18th century. The smallpox was running rampant, and he really trusted Onesimus. A lot of the slaves were coming to the States and they had smallpox, and Onesimus said he'd never had it. Well, he then described to him a process later called variolation, where they would protect themselves. It was happening in Turkey and other countries, where they would take someone that was infected, they'd take a needle and prick the skin to basically inoculate and forever protect them against smallpox. So actually, the father of vaccines in America was an African man, a slave named Onesimus. So that's the root and the DNA of the process in its power.
Teach, brother, teach. Dr. Walker, we have a question from the chat, by the way, someone who has severe asthma, and they want to know, does that make it impossible for them to get the RSV?
Not unless they've had other responses to the components of the vaccine. And so those are good questions to ask your provider. If you haven't had an adverse response to other vaccines, then you should be okay with the RSV vaccine as well.
Good. Carrie, we really, really appreciate it. This is what we want, is to be able to get ourselves in practice. Ask questions. It's okay to ask. It is horrible not to ask. Before we close out the show, I do want to get a quick conversation with Eric and Adosia, whose name I'm sure I'm mangling, but it's the most beautiful name I've heard this week, around community engagement. Now, what most people do not realize is that with the COVID experience, we always have had these health disparities in the Black community. For the first time in history, we closed a health gap with primary series COVID vaccinations. The first time we've ever done it. Our response after the slowest start with all of the problems we've had, carrying an anvil on our back, history and legacy, all kinds of difficulties getting access to all the stuff they put in front of us. Our data on getting primary series COVID vaccines was as good as anywhere in the country, which is important. But that's not nearly as important as what happened because of it. Because our community got together and our fraternities and our sororities, our civic associations, our health professionals, all of us as a collective community came together to get those vaccinations and to fight for other preventive issues, wearing masks, social distance, all the things that we did together. Black life expectancy, the second year of the pandemic, was better than white America. Do you hear what I am saying? Black lives matter. And working together, we saved enormous numbers of Black lives. And so let me just ask you what we need to be doing going forward, Eric and Adoja, in terms of how do we as a community continue to come together to get our community vaccinated against these easily preventable diseases?
We need to remember our recent past and keep that same strength and energy. And we need to have you echoing in our head with the same energy that you had and have conveyed throughout this panel coming off of COVID. That same energy is the energy that will carry us forward. It was unity, it was power. As speaking for the 100 Black men, we learned to shut up and not push back when our women just said they were going to lead and told us to go to the doctor and get vaccinated. Remember at the very beginning of the pandemic, the sadness and the number of funerals when 7 out of 10 bodies that were showing up at the morgue here in Louisiana. Our governor was the first one in the country to say that 7 out of 10 bodies showing up looked exactly like us on this panel. So keep that same energy and follow you to the beating drum and trumpet with the megaphone.
Adoja.
Yes, well, shout out to the Black Coalition Against COVID for that, the groundbreaking work that the coalition did. That was a testament of unity and when we come together, because the fact of the matter is our community is most targeted by misinformation and disinformation when it comes to vaccines. And if we are aware of that and know that, then we can look at information that doesn't quite look right with the appropriate lens and ask one another, hey, does this look right to you? And pull each other together to fight against this. I will say that that means we need to reach out to those who don't normally like to talk about their health and don't normally engage in health opportunities. At MQF, we are doing health fairs across the country. And often we're going into neighborhoods where folks don't want to go to. And we have to think about that no one's going to look out for ourselves more than ourselves. And so that means that if that's not happening in your community, if you're not seeing health fairs or if you're not seeing anybody come with resources, do the research, reach out to organizations, national organizations like 100 Black Men of America, like BlackDoctor.org and others, and find our way to bring those resources to your own community because we have to look out for each other.
Well, this has been really terrific. As we close out, this is the moment for the lightning round, where each of you, beginning with Dr. Walker and then Brooks and then Griggs and then back to you, Adoja, you get 10 seconds, maybe 15, to say the one thing that you want to double down on that you've already said, or the one thing you didn't say that you sure wish you had said. So Dr. Walker, your turn.
10 seconds. The vaccine is given between 32 and 36 weeks. It's passive immunity. It's a gift that you can give to your unborn child, and that helps them prevent one vaccine when they're born.
Dr. Brooks.
Don't get fooled by the okie doke. There's a lot of misinformation out there. These vaccines, including RSV, are biotechnological miracles. It took us, we've been working on RSV for 20 plus years and finally have the breakthrough. Do not be fooled. Go get yourself vaccinated.
All right, Dr. Griggs.
Ask the difficult questions. That's why we're here. We're here all the time. Take a relative, have the difficult conversation, ask about vaccines, and know that you have an army behind you.
And finally,
yes, from a mother to other mothers, do the right thing. Okay, protect your children from death, protect your children from disease, protect your family from financial burden. No unforced errors are needed here. Do the right thing, ask the right questions, advocate for yourself and for your family and for your future children.
well, thank you so much to an outstanding panel. And let us just remember that it really is important. Black lives do matter. And we have a wonderful community that can learn and has learned and have always struggled together to save our own lives. The tools are there. We just have to use them. We want to thank also BIO for sponsoring this program, the world's largest biotech trade association, the field where breakthroughs began. And of course, to all of our colleagues at BlackDoctor.org. Have a good evening, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.